Welcome to Proof of PR, your passport to the world of public relations for Bitcoin and Web3. I'm your host, Kelly Weaver, CEO of Melrose PR, a leading provider of communications and PR strategy in our unique industry. Get ready for an inside look into the future of finance, technology, and entrepreneurship from those driving innovation in the space. Join us as we learn how they generate headlines, cut through the noise, and grow their brand awareness through media placements, press mentions, and thought leadership. These are the stories behind their success. This is Proof of PR.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Nikki Brown, the Chief Strategy Officer at Melrose PR. I'm guest hosting today in place of Kelly Weaver, who normally hosts these episodes. And I'm delighted to have Molly Jane Zuckerman here with us, the opinion editor at Blockworks.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course. Well, to kick things off, we'd love to just hear a bit of background and, kind of your journey of what ultimately led to your current position as the opinion editor at Blockworks.
Sure. So I got into crypto in a bit of an unorthodox way. I had just finished, or I was actually only halfway through a master's degree in Russian political science when I needed to earn some money, and a friend of mine had been hired at Cointelegraph. She answered an ad online, and this was December 2017, so Bitcoin was going to $20,000 for the very first time. And she reached out to me because she knew I had done some journalism and asked if I could sort of help her out in her new position as an editor to write for her. And so I started writing, and that was 5 years ago. Worked at a few different companies in the crypto space. I mean, starting at Cointelegraph, I was at CoinMarketCap doing a bit more of like educational content. And then I ended up back at Blockworks almost a year ago to do opinions.
You published an op-ed at one point that got a lot of attention on crypto Twitter called "I'm a Crypto Journalist, just please don't tell anyone," which I think got a lot of shares, likes. People were discussing it because it's true. Like, what is it about this industry that's just horrific to anyone outside of it? And would love your thoughts on what led you to publish that piece.
Yeah, I mean, even this morning, I'm dog sitting. I'm actually at a friend's apartment looking at this cute little dog, and she's reading a New York Times article about Praxis, the new crypto state. Horrible, seems like bit white supremacy fundraising. And she goes, "Oh, crypto's so disgusting." Yes, there are some parts of crypto that are disgusting, but this guy raising money to build a libertarian island, like, that's not really cryptocurrency. Like, you can't really put that blame on us. But I think that highlights the point of cryptocurrency has like a very certain reputation. And even though what I do is journalism that just happens to be covering the industry of cryptocurrency, it's very hard for people to sort of make that connection. They hear the word crypto and their mind just sort of goes to these dark places. I've had friends be like, "Oh, it must be so crazy working with all of those crypto journalists. Like, they must dress so crazily." I was like, "No, we're all just journalists." Like, there's, if a journalist, you can cover healthcare, you can cover crypto, you can cover banking, you can cover sports. And so I try to make that very clear when I tell people what I do. At the end of the day, what people remember are this new Praxis guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, Coinbase Super Bowl commercials, Tom Brady, and so there's sort of a lot of almost apologizing for your career, which is frustrating, which is what I wrote about. Because you don't want to apologize for what you do, especially if you like what you do. But if people call what you do disgusting, then you either have to be defensive or apologetic. It's people don't give you the chance to just have like a neutral statement of fact about, where you work.
Right. No, that's so interesting that people often conflate the sort of negative side of this industry with everyone else who's involved, when the reality is it's such a small piece. Clearly SBF, not a good representation for any industry. And I think there's a lot of confusion around what he did as just straight fraud. It had nothing to do with crypto, but for people outside the space, they just don't connect the dots on that. And I know that you were there covering the trial. So do you have sort of, what were your takeaways from that experience?
Yeah, covering the trial was probably the highlight of the year for me, even though it was the low light of the year for Sam. Definitely getting to be there and hear him give testimony for his own case, which no one thought that he would do, and then he ended up doing, most likely against the advice of all of his lawyers. And he did not acknowledge he did anything criminally wrong. It was like everything was just all a big misunderstanding because he was so smart and everyone else was so dumb. And so it was very frustrating to hear, especially after you've just seen 5 weeks of evidence of criminal wrongdoing that he and everyone else very much knew about. But I do agree with your point. I do think what he did just was take advantage of an industry, as opposed to he was a crypto fraudster and like only because crypto existed was he able to do those things. I mean, what he loosely did was a Ponzi scheme. It's not like a direct Ponzi scheme, but like generally like a complex fraudulent scheme that involved bringing in more people to make more money. And it just happened to be that cryptocurrency was a really great conduit at the time. But I do think that if crypto didn't exist, he would have done this with like, I don't know, trading old cars, or like there's always a way for people that are smart and know how to use financial markets to make that up.
Yeah, Molly, that's so interesting that you had that experience. Just confusion across the board from people on where to focus and how to make sense of that whole situation, given it was branded as such a crypto related trial. Kind of jumping into just, your role as an opinion editor, there's so many strong perspectives in the space. What really does make an opinion piece stand out? I've heard you say on previous interviews that you can, decipher whether a pitch or an op-ed draft would make a good article in 5 seconds. So how do you do that?
Honestly, the easiest way to rule things out is if it's clear that someone is just trying to explain how something works, as opposed to giving any take on it. So most of the opinions I get are someone saying, this is why RWAs are so important. That may sound like an opinion, and like, yes, their importance, like it could be contested, but most of the time, it's very obvious the piece is just, this is what they've done, this is what's happening. Like there's no actual angle to it or any sort of perspective. It's usually just a summary. So the summary pieces are very, very easy to dismiss because I don't need a summary. Like you can read that on Investopedia. You shouldn't be reading that. The thing that I really find fascinating is when someone has an opinion that has nothing to do with what they are personally building at the moment, because then the genuineness is much easier for me to believe in. So if someone is doing something with tokenization and they have a piece about centralized exchanges, I'm much more interested in what they have to say than if they have an opinion about tokenization, because it will be very hard for me sometimes to tell between what their thoughts are and then what will just be good for their next product launch that I don't know about potentially in the future. If you look at opinions that are written in like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc., yes, there are experts in certain fields that then opine about those fields, but it's very clear that like this person just feels passionately about this subject that has nothing to do with any sort of financial or monetary or like marketing gain for them. And people are like, oh, but I want to mention my product because it's what I care about. Yes. And sometimes it works, but sometimes you've just written like a fantastic blog post for your own website where it will go and people that want to buy your product will read it and learn something, as opposed to being in an opinion section of a newspaper.
That's a great explanation. And this is a lot of what we do on the PR side and working with our clients as well, is trying to educate them. Like this is what opinion editors are looking for. And this is what makes a great opinion piece. It cannot be promotional. Then that's going to be considered sponsored content. And there's like a separate place for that. So yeah, it's super helpful to have that context. And I mean, I'm sure there's probably all kinds of things that you receive in your inbox, but I mean, it feels like something we deal with often is people coming to us with ideas that have just been played out so many times, or it's an opinion, but everyone holds that opinion. Like, we need regulatory clarity. Yeah, we do. We do need that. But what's the different take on that, on how or why? Or like the mass adoption angle. Yeah, there's just these kind of like narratives that you kind of see over and over again. And I wonder how, is that kind of true to your experience as well?
When I push back on people saying, oh, this is more of an explanation, I don't really see your angle here, and they come back with their opinion, I mean, in my own mind, I just think, is there anyone living or dead that's sane that could argue the opposite? So if your opinion is we need more regulatory clarity, is there the opinion that we actually don't need regulatory clarity? Things should be murky. And I mean, it sounds kind of silly. I think that actually you could make that point. You could say the laws are fine. It's clear enough now. But so it's when people are forming opinions, I don't care if everyone holds it. If you have something new to say about it, I think we've run 9 opinions about how bad Gary Gensler is at his job. He's bad in different ways, according to different people. That's fine. I think I use this phrase a lot, which is like, you have to come down on one side of a multi-sided issue. If there's no other side to the issue, then it's not an opinion. It's not an op-ed. It's an opinion, but it's not an op-ed, especially for Blockworks.
Yeah, that's a great characterization of it. And it makes sense. Like, of course, these same topics are going to come up time and time again. And there are new opportunities to discuss it because things have changed. Things are changing every day in crypto. So there's always an opportunity for a fresh take. I'm curious to ask you, what's your opinion on just the role of crypto Twitter? I think I've heard you say that you feel Twitter is a poor measurement for the success of an article. So how do you, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you use Twitter for your own pieces? And, how does Blockworks use it for opinion content in general?
So when I first started at Blockworks, I would use crypto Twitter because I could easily see people that were smart and knowledgeable about different facets of the space, posting interesting thoughts. And then I would follow up and say, do you want to turn this thought into a 500-word article for us at Blockworks? And that has essentially become non-existent over the past 9 months. I'm not sure if people aren't posting or if the algorithm is different or something, but Twitter has become essentially unusable to find new leads, which makes the job of an opinion editor difficult because I don't want to just rely on people reaching out to me. I need to see what's going on in the market and in the industry and find people that can comment on it. And with Twitter not an option, it's like, am I really going to be using LinkedIn? And it's not like I can look at other opinion sections because it's already been done then. I can't go steal that person to write the same thing for us. So it's definitely, Twitter being what it is now is frustrating.
That's interesting that you've witnessed crypto Twitter undergo such a shift during your tenure at Blockworks. Do you feel you're able to kind of forecast like how things will possibly change again as we look ahead? And are people going to be using new tools for community and sharing of information and for your own purposes as well?
Every time something new has come along, I've joined it. Blue Sky, specifically just Blue Sky and Threads. In order to track the success of an opinion piece, sure, you can look at page views or how long people are reading it. But what's interesting is if people are actually discussing the points in it. And I used to be able to see that on Twitter, and I don't see that as much anymore. I can see it on Reddit. We don't have a comment section. So it's really like I put an opinion out into the world, and then I have no idea how many of the thousands of people that read it agree or disagree. And it just would be interesting for me to know that. And so if there's a way I can figure that out without Twitter, I would love that. But I don't see anything taking its place, really.
Wow. So it's kind of tough to, in a way, measure the success of an opinion piece then. If you're not really saying success is the number of comments or something, then what it really is a curation of various perspectives that you and Blockworks is putting out. But I think that's actually more accurate, right? Like, how are we supposed to kind of rate the value of different opinions in the space? There's not really a good way of doing that. The point is to have different opinions, hopefully from people with some credibility, to help the rest of us kind of form our own point of view on various topics that matter a lot at a given time. How do you feel about it and the kind of the role of opinion in the crypto space? People
tend to have very, very strong opinions. And I love when they're showcased on Blockworks or just in like a longer written form than just on Twitter. One of my favorite things is whenever we are able to have opinions that are contrary. You know, we've had pieces that Sam Bankman-Fried's shadow will cover Twitter forever. And then a week later being like, we will forget Sam Bankman-Fried in a month and nothing will actually change. So I do think that if there's a platform for people to see multiple sides of an issue, I mean, research has proven that no one will change their mind, even if they're confronted with fact. No one will change their mind. I'm not trying to change people's minds. I just think that just to have the information there, if they're curious to see what the other side is thinking, is an important thing for crypto, where people tend to just post these very black and white things on Twitter or on, I don't know, social media in general, and then start fights because there's no context for why they feel the way that they feel.
That definitely makes sense. And I also think that you're totally right. Then there's research that shows people are very, very unlikely to change their perspective on something when faced with even just evidence that they're wrong or basing their perspective on unfounded data. But sometimes I think that it can be helpful when an opinion piece just showcases some nuance that maybe no one else is really showcasing or talking about, that, might not be a groundbreaking kind of point of view to put out there, but it's like, okay, everyone's talking about the regulatory atmosphere and the coming inevitability of spot Bitcoin ETF approvals. And then if someone has like a different take on, it's probably coming, but maybe not as soon as we think because of XYZ, that kind of opinion can be useful for just getting people to think a little bit more about it, I think, even beyond the stream of content.
Actually coming up in a week or two. So if you're interested, when you watch this, look back in our section to see our editor-in-chief opine about Bitcoin ETFs. He has some strong thoughts. I'll just leave it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about just your work with PR professionals. I assume that you deal with a lot of people like me coming to you with pitches of ideas their clients have come up with. So what are some kind of tips and maybe some thoughts on what PR people can do well in working with you on op-ed content?
If any way possible, to reduce the amount of back and forth over email. So there's no reason to ask me, do I want to see a draft? If you have a draft, send me a draft. It's sort of like, let's make each click of the computer, like reduce the number of clicks. The other thing, I never want you to put your draft in the body of the email. It's just, think about how many pitches I get a day, which, I mean, it's not crazy, but it could be anywhere from 5 to 15. And if I'm going to look at them with any sort of like real depth to them, I kind of need to have them all open. I'm not going to open Gmail 15 different times, like Google Doc, just sort of like these things where that will just make it easier for me to evaluate. Something I've spoken about before, which is I care very little about who the author is beyond their name and maybe a link to their socials. A lot of people will start the pitch with like very detailed information about how much money all of their company companies have raised. That makes me not only think this piece is definitely not going to be an opinion, it's going to be some sort of explanation. It makes me think, well, are they trying to raise more money? And this is why they want this byline out there. So money is very unimportant to an opinion editor's evaluation of a piece. If you're working with a client who has a piece, I think what a lot of people tend to do is write an op-ed like a college essay, where there's an introduction, then there's all the evidence in the middle, and then in the end, there's the conclusion. An opinion piece really actually starts with the conclusion. So if you want to do a sort of sanity check on your op-ed, it's like in the first 5 sentences, is it incredibly clear exactly how you feel about the topic? Because if it's not clear until once you've explained all the background, then you've done it wrong. And like, yes, that won't be, I can edit that, but it's more just like for your own sake to think about an opinion piece. And then the last thing I'll say, because I do get pushback a lot on headlines, we make it clear in our op-ed guidelines that we have control editorially over the headline and the socials. That doesn't mean we will come up with things that will like disparage the author in the headline, but that we get to decide the headline, and the headline should be the opinion. So someone will look at the headline and think, I agree or I disagree. So your headline shouldn't be stablecoin predictions, because there's no agreement or disagreement there. It's just like a fact.
That definitely makes sense. And that's helpful when, the piece is inevitably posted on Twitter, allowing people to get a quick take on what this is about and decide whether they want to read the whole thing or not. So that definitely makes sense. You mentioned that, you really don't care about someone's background other than, their name and maybe like what project they're at, so you can determine, is this a promotional piece or an op-ed? Does the kind of clout of the person factor in deciding whose opinions to run, or does that not matter so much as long as they're with a legitimate project and they've got an interesting piece?
I would say it matters very little to me. I've run pieces where someone has quite literally 0 Twitter followers before. They just had something really interesting to say. This was someone who was a translator who worked for different crypto companies. So we're definitely not obsessed with C-suite or with a lot of, and honestly, the thing I find is people that have a lot of Twitter followers, when they pitch opinions to me, they sort of read like tweet threads, which isn't ideal. And so sometimes it even could be a bad thing if you're used to tweeting to the masses to sort of change that mentality. So yeah, long answer, short, no. Clout is not that important.
Yeah, that I'm sure that's reassuring for a lot of people to hear who are working on projects in the space and want to have a voice. Since we are currently at that time of year, and by the time this episode airs, still early on in 2024, I understand you're probably getting a lot of prediction-related pitches for what's to come in the new year. Do you have any predictions on just crypto journalism, the space at large, or just thoughts on the trajectory of areas of focus based on the types of content you've been receiving? Yeah,
I mean, I do think that, as silly as it is, there will be some big regulatory moves coming in the next year. The SEC has done a significant number of enforcement actions, and I imagine they will keep coming and the companies will keep fighting back. So that narrative to me of the SEC versus crypto is definitely going to continue. I hope that prices stop what they're doing, because whenever prices go up, the amount of scams and identity theft and fraud that it makes it for interesting journalism to cover, but there are only so many op-eds I can write about like why I think you need to keep your crypto safe, because that's not really an opinion. No one's like, I want my crypto to be like unprotected out there in the wild. Yeah, so I don't know what's going to happen with the markets, but I hope things sort of calm down a bit. I'm tired of everyone I know getting SIM swapped, because that's just what has been happening since Bitcoin broke $40,000. I know the thing that's being talked about right now is points. It seems to me that I imagine a lot of projects that are using points now will be sued for securities fraud in 2024. So that's another prediction. I won't name names. That seems like they're securities to me. So those are my predictions. Maybe not that positive. Yeah.
You're in a unique position with this role to just get spectrum of views. I was curious, like, where you think things are going. So that's interesting. Well, Molly, this has been an absolute pleasure. Do you have any other kind of closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with listeners?
Yeah, definitely keep pitching me. I have a lot of room for lots of different types of opinions, so don't be shy. The best pitches are the ones that come up organically from someone that said, I was going to write this on my blog, but then I thought of Blockworks. That always feels really nice. So please keep them coming in 2024.
That's awesome and very encouraging. Molly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in to Proof of PR. This episode was brought to you by Melrose PR, the leading provider of communications and PR strategy for Bitcoin and Web3 innovators. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen today. To stay up to date on upcoming guests and news, visit proofofpr.com or follow us on Twitter @proofofpr. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and hodling.